Welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about the corn seed maggot and how it can affect pea plants. One thing I'm going to be trying this year is pre-soaking some of these pea seeds, right? I'm going to be having 5 different groups of 50 pea seeds each, where I'm going to be using a specific solution in the pre-soaking treatment that will hopefully either repel the corn seed maggot, and then the other part that I'd be testing is the speed of germination, right? If I can quicken the speed of germination, then those corn seed maggots have less of a chance to have an impact. So basically how I've designed this experiment is I have 5 different groups. In the first group I have the seeds that did not get any treatment. They're just going to be the dry seeds that get planted into the soil directly. Then in the second group they are going to be soaked in a cup of water, and then in the third group they will be soaked into a cup of water with a little bit of diluted magnesium or Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate. And in the fourth group they will be soaked in an infusion that has been allowed to go to room temperature before the peas are added, so that they don't get cooked. And this infusion will be of like a ground IVT. Of course I'm talking about the Glaucoma heteracea. And then in the fifth group I am going to be making a decoction from violet roots, and we'll be soaking the pea seeds in that. So basically the idea is that the dry seeds is my control group. The soaking in water is to see if that will help to expedite the germination process, shortening the time when the seeds are dormant or not emerged from the soil. And then soaking in the magnesium sulfate or the Epsom salts is to see if that extra shot of magnesium will help to speed up the germination rate, as what some gardeners claim, thereby limiting the amount of time that seed will be spending in the ground. In the fourth group, the ground ivy infusion, ground ivy is in the mint family, so it has some essential oils, also has some different phenolic compounds that I am just kind of wondering if it may have a deterrent effect when the seeds imbibe that, and if it would make it like less tasty to maggots or anything like that. Then in the fifth group I have the decoction of violet roots. Violet roots do tend to have some very potent qualities to them, especially in regards to medicinal uses or precautions being poisonous or toxicity. So some of those effects may be really felt by some of these corn seed maggots potentially when the seeds begin to imbibe this violet root decoction. Alright, so this is the first section, the untreated seeds that were dry when they were planted. We have 37 total that came up. And then of course I have parsnips planted in between these 2 rows of peas. Those are just starting to come up. So anyway, moving ahead to this plot. This is the plot that were just soaked in water. Overall they seem to be a little further ahead in growth than the previous plot, and so it looks like we have 38 plants that have come up. You can tell they're a little further ahead in growth since they are starting to already begin putting out some tendrils. Moving over here to the magnesium plot, there's a big dandelion that came up, but here overall they don't seem to be too much different from the previous group. I was not around to see when they came up, if they came up quicker or not, so that I might be able to do this test, and I probably will do this test again on beans since they're a similar crop and they get planted later. And I may have multiple plots where I test this stuff, so hopefully I get some more accurate results, accurate or reliable results. So here we have, in this magnesium plot, we have the 36 that came up. Seems like we're getting progressively less successful germination rates as we progress through this. Alright, so let's check out this ground ivy plot. These don't seem to be too much different from the two previous groups. Starting to put out tendrils too. So here we only have 33 that came up. And some of this could be seed quality too. Just not being consistent. I mean, we're talking about marginal differences at this point. Let's check out the violets. The violet root group. Starting to put out tendrils too. So we have about 36 that came up in this violet root decoction. So it's also possible that these plants these seeds got planted when the seedcorn maggots were not particularly active. But yeah. Alright, so here again we have the peas. This is the patch that was not soaked in anything before planting the seeds. As you can see, well, we're going through a bit of a drought right now, and you can kind of see that they're pretty yellow towards the bases, a little bit of green up top. They're beginning to go into flower, but they don't look tremendously great. I move over here. These guys look marginally better, a little bit more green than yellow. The yellow is more towards the base of the plants again. The plants are moderately more vigorous. Those are parsnips, of course, that I've planted in between. And that's the case for all of these rows or plots. And these are the seeds that were soaked in just water. Now we move over here to the peas that were soaked in the magnesium sulfate solution. You can see there's a lot more green than yellow on the plants. The plants are a little further ahead with flowering, are already beginning to go into flower here, even though all these plots were planted on the same day. And the plants are a lot bigger. They're a darker green, larger leaves, larger plants. Look a lot better, even in these drought conditions. And I've been watering all of these plots. During this drought condition, these plants are still not getting all the water they need, obviously. But it's really interesting to see these differences nonetheless. And how these plants can become a little bit more resilient depending on how they're treated before planting. So we move over here now to this plot. The plants are not quite as vigorous in the previous plot, but this was the plot that was soaked. The seeds were soaked in the ground ivy infusion, ground ivy tea. The plants look somewhat better than the ones that were soaked in just water, but not as good as the ones that were soaked in the magnesium sulfate solution. But that's interesting. that there does seem to be a moderate improvement from the ones that were just soaked in water, and more improvement from the ones that were not soaked at all. So it does seem to be that the ground ivy infusion has somewhat of an impact on these plants growing well, relatively well. But the plants aren't as large, but the plants aren't as dark green or as large as the ones that were soaked in the magnesium sulfate. Now, moving over here to this final plot, the seeds, of course, were soaked in the violet root decoction, and these plants again look tremendously huge in comparison to some of the others seen before. They look very similar to the ones that were soaked in the magnesium sulfate solution, which is very interesting. You know, they look very vital, getting ready to flower. But again, you've got larger plants, larger leaves, darker green leaves, very similar to the ones that were soaked in magnesium sulfate. And the plants are looking really vigorous, really healthy, even in this time of drought. So again, looking over here, we have these seeds. This is not in one of the test plots. This is just normal seeds that were soaked in plain water. Rutabagas are growing in between. Again, we have a lot of yellowing plants from the base up. Smaller plants beginning to go into flower, but not looking tremendously vigorous. So it is very interesting to see these differences. It might be neat to combine the magnesium sulfate and the violet root decoction. It might also be good to just do some other test plots of different plots of the violet root decoction and magnesium sulfate and things of that nature. Maybe trying some other plants or other combinations, combining the ground ivy with the violet root decoction. But it does seem that there are some very marked differences with how the magnesium sulfate and, well, especially how the magnesium sulfate and the violet root decoction have influenced the growth and vitality of these plants. Right, the initial intention was to protect them from the corn seed maggot, which was kind of hard to tell whether or not that worked, but the consequences, or positive consequences, that came after that were unexpected, but very intriguing. And even the ground ivy infusion had somewhat of a positive impact, and it seemed, in just judging by my eyes, it was better than just soaking it in plain water. So a lot of stuff to learn here, a lot of things to continue to experiment with and to research, but this is some really cool stuff. So thanks so much for checking out this video again, and hope you learned something. I certainly learned something today, and look forward to seeing you in a future video. Take care.